Welcome to the Perception Podcast. My name is Olumide Moses. Today we're going to be talking about why Africans are poor. Why are Africans poor? Africans are poor in one of four ways. The first one is political poverty. The second one is poverty of insecurity. The third one is ignorance of the mind. And the last one is poverty of the will and spirit. Now let's treat one after the other. Political poverty simply refers to a situation where people see politics as a way of poverty. They forget the role of patriotism. They forget the role of service. They forget the role of political and social capital. That does not exist to them. What they really do, they try to navigate the nooks and crannies of what it takes to get to political office at any cost, even to the point of killing the opposition or the contestant. I am telling you, our politics is done in Africa. This is very unfortunate because if you have patriotism, if you have service, if you have social and political capital to advance the cause of your nation, to serve in public office, you need not to embrace politics as a way of poverty. This is what I call political poverty. And navigating the nooks and crannies of political poverty, for instance, Nigeria, our senators, legislators, they collect the highest salary in the world, if not one of the highest salary in the world. This is very unfortunate. This is what I call political poverty. Now, they navigate the nooks and crannies to get to the political office by any means, hook, line, and sinker, and this is very unfortunate. This is what we've come to find out about African nations. There's no self-service, there's no patriotism, and that's why Africa is suffering from economic hardship and is driven by political poverty. Now let me move deeper into political poverty. When I talk of political poverty, I'm talking of people who want to contest for public office, see it as an opportunity to develop what they call political elitism, whereby they go into politics, they are at the ends of affairs and they are in position. Rather than do what is necessary, they do otherwise, they become corrupt. This is what I call political poverty. Now, political poverty, as I've said, is seeing politics as a way out of poverty, navigating the nooks and crannies, doing whatever is necessary by all means or by any means to get to that political office, rigging or whatever you call it. This is political poverty because there's no patriotism, there's no service, there's no social capital, there's no social political capital to advance the cause of the nation. There's nothing driving the agenda to achieve policy making, implementation, and legislation to take the country forward. This is very unfortunate. This is what we've come to see in Africa. Whenever people see politics as a way out of poverty, based on what the environment is, based on what people in political office are living by examples, showing them, then they see politics as a way of poverty. Now, I've talked about political poverty. Now, let's look at poverty of insecurity. When you've developed an inkling of political poverty, you develop what I call poverty of insecurity. What do I mean by poverty of insecurity? Poverty of insecurity simply refers to the second stage of political poverty, whereby people who get to public office see it as a means to enrich themselves rather than put in place policies that will advance the social and political good of their constituents, of the ordinary citizenry, and this is very unfortunate. This doesn't exist. Rather, they see it as opportunity to loot public coffers and enrich themselves at the expense of the populace. And all this begins to develop what we call corruption. This is a very big problem in African states. Poverty of insecurity is shaped by political poverty. And all these are thoughts, ideologies, philosophy, and psychology. What I've been saying is this. Poverty of insecurity is looting public coffers rather than doing what is necessary to advance policies to move the nation and to be subservient to the constituents which they represent, to how will I put this, to present their case so that whatever they lack in that constituents could be achieved by having a representative. This is not the case. Rather, they see political office as a position to enrich themselves and advance their own personal cause rather than the cause of the constituency they represent. This is what I call political poverty. Then the second stage, which is poverty of insecurity. They feel so insecure that they are even poorer than the beggar on the slimy streets of Bangladesh and also the beggars of Calcutta. Because if you are to be in public office and you see it as an opportunity to enrich yourself at the expense of the populace, then you are as insecure as more than even the beggar on the slimy streets of India or on the streets of Calcutta in India. It tells you the level of poverty. Conventionally, you look rich, but in your mind, you are poor. Spiritually, you are poor. Politically, you are poor. And physically, you are poor. And conventionally, you're very stupid. For you to see political office as an enrichment to advance your personal cause rather than the interest of the constituents or the citizenry which you represent. This is poverty of insecurity. It's very unfortunate that we have such in Africa. I'm using Nigeria as a case study or as the microcosm of what I'm talking about. Now, let's move to ignorance of the mind. Now, when those who are in political office or who are at the aim of affairs have created an environment that suits them, that has shaped the mindset of the populace and of the citizenry, they create an atmosphere that develops an ignorance, in the sense that because of they put policies in place that benefit them rather than the citizenry, they now develop an environment of ignorance, whereby people, when they look at the political system and they look at the environment, they feel there's nothing that can come out of it. As a result, they accept their lot in life because of what the environment is. And they feel hopeless and helpless, and they feel they cannot do nothing. And as a result of that, they give up and they develop ignorance of the mind. Anything that is other than what they've been thinking, or what the political class or the political elite is trying to dictate or trying to create as a sort of atmosphere and environment before them, is what they accept. Anything other than that if you think outside the box, you'll be deemed to be not realistic. Now, let's move to poverty of the will and spirit. When you're in an environment that is hopeless and helpless, you have what I call poverty of the will and spirit. The will to advance your cause will be almost impossible or be very difficult. Why? Because of the atmosphere and the environment that's been created by the political class. As a result of this, your will will be very low, because what is deemed ordinary in a state that is functioning, not a state that is filled with dysfunction, you see to be almost an Herculean task. It's like an Achilles heel. It's very unfortunate, but this is the case in Africa, whereby poverty of the will and spirit exists in most African nations, because they develop the first system, which is political poverty, very unfortunate, then poverty of insecurity, then ignorance of the mind in form of a propaganda to the mind, because they've created the atmosphere and environment through which they can manipulate the citizenry and the populace. Then they now take them to the last level of the poverty of the will and spirit. And when they've created such artificial atmosphere, such as this of the poverty of the will and spirit, people can be easily manipulated, and propaganda begins to shape the order of the day. And this is what their own sort of politics is about. So poverty of the will and spirit is created as a result of the environment of the political class. The political class created this environment, which is very unfortunate. Let me give you a clear, vivid example of what an African looks like. Now, in the 21st century, in political leadership, let's say a 23-year-old has majored in a particular course. is looking for a job, he can't get a job. Why can't he get a job? Because those who are in the aim of affairs have failed them. They fail to do what is necessary. That is why they're having this problem. And when they fail to do what's necessary and they've applied for jobs over and over in various sectors of the economy and they are not able to get a job, what happens? They develop hopelessness and helplessness, and they become sad. That's the case of the young African, because he will now suffer poverty of insecurity, because he sees those at the aim of affairs politically, they're enriching themselves. So he has no patriotism or a sense of belonging, of nationhood or patriotism. He begins to develop the insecurity of poverty, because it's what is seen in the environment, is what the political class is creating. The atmosphere is what you're creating. So that's what it is. And as a result of it, that becomes jobless, hopeless, and helpless. And he now develops ignorance of the mind, because it's what they've created as an atmosphere and is what is operating. And whenever he has tried over and over and he's given up, he becomes weak in his mind. His will and spirit becomes filled with poverty. He accepts his lot in light. And these are artificial systems created by the political class. So what I've been talking about is why Africans are poor. Africans are poor in one of four ways. First, political poverty. Second, poverty of insecurity. Third, ignorance of the mind. And last, poverty of the will and spirit. Now let me reverse it in another way that you can easily understand. Political poverty is also political elitism. Insecurity of the mind is propaganda. Insecurity of the mind is propaganda. Ignorance of the mind is also propaganda. Poverty of the will and spirit is propaganda. So what have I been saying? I've been saying that political elitism is political poverty. Insecurity of the mind is corruption. Ignorance of the mind is ignorance. And poverty of the will and spirit is also a propaganda. So what I've been saying is Africans are poor in one of four ways. Political poverty, poverty of insecurity, ignorance of the mind, and poverty of the will and spirit. I've been sounding very political, right? Yes, this is what I've come to know about African states. Not all, but 19% of African states. This is the truth, and I hope you guys have learned one or two things from this podcast. Thank you very much.